Your listeners have no more clarity on your call to action than you do. That is an awkward sentence, so I'll just say it one more time. Your listeners have no more clarity on your call to action than you do. You are presenting at a research conference. Why? Why are you doing this? Let me share with you some of my favorite suboptimal reasons to go present at a research conference. And I do not mean suboptimal as in there is something morally wrong with any of these. I just mean maybe we can do better, okay? First suboptimal reason might be, well, my supervisor told me I had to do it and I'm an indentured servant beholden to their whims. That might be true. It doesn't not necessarily, well, there might be ethical dimensions there, but this is a very legitimate reason why someone might go present at a research conference. But I hope it's not the main reason we're going to go present at a research conference. My lab needed a humanoid to go recite the introduction, methods, results, and discussions of our paper, and I lost the coin flip. I want to do the things that academics do, and this is what academics do. And that's not bad. Again, no judgment. The conference is in wherever, and they are paying my airfare and accommodations. You know, fun fact, I have not met an academic in all of my many years who has not confessed to this at least once. Again, no judgment. But I hope you're going for some other reasons as well. I need some professional clout on my CV. I need more connections on LinkedIn. Sure, again, legitimate reason. Again, social animal, that makes sense. I'm playing serendipity roulette with the universe. This opportunity came up. Someone said, do you want to? And I said yes. Again, nothing wrong with that. But is it optimal? I think a great way to think about an optimal reason for going to this conference, for presenting your research, is to ask, what do you want your listeners to do? So we'll just take our 6 little emoji people here as an example. What is it that we hope that these individuals do as a result of their experience listening to your talk at this research conference? I think we have to make a distinction between information and knowledge. And I think maybe a lot of us intuitively combine these concepts, but it's worth making a bit of a distinction between the two. If I go into my kitchen and I pull out a recipe book, I look at the recipe, I have information. I have data. But do I have knowledge of creating that meal or creating that dish until I make it? I might know a vocabulary. I might have the information about what words mean what between languages. But do I have knowledge of that language until I can carry a conversation in it? I might read methodology. I might have a complete understanding of here is the study design. But do you have knowledge until you've run the experiment? Information is what you get when you sit through a presentation. Knowledge is doing something differently as a result. And so you are going into a presentation to, in many respects, deliver some raw data. But knowledge is not part of the equation until and or if your audience does something with it. Can you extract knowledge from action? Is there such a thing as possessing knowledge outside of doing something? How do you determine the value of information you cannot act upon? And you know this feeling when you are sitting through a lecture and someone is going on and on and on saying things. And even today, if I start saying things that you feel that are not relevant to you, that you can't do something with, you are going to just turn off. Remember? Like you're living in a world being bombarded by data from every which direction. And so if I'm up here going to give you more data that doesn't make sense to what you need, want, or doing in life, you've got really effective filtering mechanisms for blocking that. Is your presentation a means or an end? And if it's an end, that just means the goal of the presentation was to deliver a presentation. Your presentation is a means if the goal of your presentation is so that something in the world changes, which means that someone in the world does something different as a result of the information you have shared. Are we tracking? Okay, so what is the optimal listener response to your presentation? There they are. They're going to sit there, they're going to listen to you for the amount of time that you're going to talk. What is it that we are hoping that they do? There are many things that we might want them to do. Here's some ideas. We might say, you know what, I'm going to present this paper, and I hope somebody who is in this presentation is going to read the paper. That is something that somebody does. I hope that somebody who is in this presentation is going to cite this paper in their research. Maybe people in this room might become collaborators or co-investigators in our work. Maybe what happens as a result of this presentation is that some of these people help open new networks, help expand the reach of these studies. Maybe the people in the room, maybe the whole reason I'm doing this is so that people in the room can help me identify gaps in my understanding or our methodology or something. Maybe I'm looking for feedback, perspective. I'm asking somebody to do something. Maybe I'm hoping somebody in the lab somebody in the audience, can refer new students to the lab, be a part of our research. Maybe I'm hoping that the people in the room look at their own research differently, maybe in some kind of qualitatively or quantitatively different way. Maybe I'm hoping that, the people in the room, some people in the room are either going to partner on future or follow-up studies, or maybe they're going to be, part of a network that supports participant recruitment down the road. Maybe I present this research, and my hope is that you sign up to an email list to be a part of this journey, because maybe what we're doing right now, maybe the findings are really tentative and maybe we're just exploring, but I'm trying to build a network over time to be a part of this together. That is still looking at something somebody is going to do as a result. Just ideas. These kinds of things, if you can clarify them in your mind, become your compass. Because you can look at every question you're going to ask yourself about the presentation you create and go, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I focus on this or emphasize that? And your compass is, what is it that I hope the people who are listening to this presentation will do? What is the action that they are going to take? The filter, the best filter to run those questions through. So how are you going to figure out your call to action? How, and by call to action, that's jargony internet phraseology, but I just mean, what is it that you hope people are going to do as a result? How are you going to figure that out? If you buy my premise that this is foundational stuff, that you build everything that happens next based upon the actions you're hoping people will take, because you are hoping that the information you share is going to translate to knowledge, which requires that action. If this is foundational, then this is where we need to start. This is what we need to figure out, is what is it that you're going to ask, invite, prompt, suggest your audience to do. So how are we going to figure out this call to action? We're going to back up, think about kind of the 5 ingredients of communicating research. One is that there's knowledge. But as we've just described, so there's something that we know, but it's not just knowledge because somebody's doing something with it. So there's knowledge, and because there's knowledge, then there's action. Somebody has done something differently, which means there's a who, which means there's an audience. If somebody is going to do something differently, there needs to be somebody doing something differently. And when you do something, it changes. It changes the world in some ways. It changes the information you receive back as a presenter. It changes all kinds of dimensions, right? So it's not just, I'm going to put information out into the world, but if people out in the world are going to do something with that information differently, that is sending new information back to me. That's what I mean by reciprocity. And then, ideally, if we were working together as a lab and designing your science communication plan or your knowledge mobilization plan or even your next research study, we want to ask, well, how do we know we did that effectively at the end? These are just 5 core ingredients: knowledge, action, audience, reciprocity, and evaluation. And if you embark on a science communication endeavor without kind of thinking about one of these, arguably, you kind of miss one of the core ingredients. And it has a cute acronym, which you can pronounce KAARE or KAARE, I suppose, depending on what you want to emphasize. When you take these 5 ingredients, you can look at them, you can triangulate them against each other. So you can say, okay, well, how does what we understand the knowledge that we're sharing here, how does our understanding of the knowledge affect how we think about the potential action people might take? Who's going to take it? What the reciprocity cycle is going to look like? Likewise, you could say, okay, how is it that we understand the action that people are going to take? How could that impact how we think about the knowledge or how we think about who the audience might be? Does that make sense? You can triangulate them against each other. That complicated sheet, which you hopefully have in your handout, is just that. It's taking these kind of core ingredients and saying, well, I could ask a bunch of questions about knowledge, but then I could ask a bunch of questions about action, audiences, reciprocity, and evaluation by asking questions about how those factors are influenced by how we understand the knowledge involved. That's a daunting 25 question sheet, which you can obviously explore on your own. But I'm going to run through these questions. I'm not going to belabor this any more than necessary, but I want to run through these questions for like one purpose alone, and that is ask these in relation to what is it that you hope the people who are going to listen to you will do. Because if we can figure that out, like a lot of other dominoes are going to land in clear ways. If we walk into that room, not just knowing our presentation, but we know our presentation because we know what it is that we hope people in the room are going to do differently as a result. So if we can nail this, we're really good to go. So some questions about knowledge. We can ask what new knowledge has been generated or demonstrated. What do we know or understand now that we did not know or understand before? Like the sentence someone asks you that you reply to when someone asks you in the elevator, like, oh, you ran that study a few months back. What did you learn? What specific actions might be taken? How concretely can we describe those actions, and what could this knowledge mean in practice? So assuming somebody did something differently because of this information, what would that be? Whose lives and decisions might be impacted by this knowledge? Who can build upon it? How specific or broad is this audience? Think through both dimensions. Think through the largest possible delineator, the largest possible net, and the narrowest possible delineator, or the narrowest possible net. What follow-up questions might be inspired, implied, or prompted by this knowledge? What is it that people might ask in follow-up? And to tag on to that, well, how? How would people do that? I mean, just beyond like raising their hand at the end of your talk, which will work great for the extroverts in the room, but not everybody else necessarily. What is their pathway? Not just what are the questions. What is the robustness of our knowledge or research findings? What are the ethical ramifications of utilizing it or implementing it? Good, reasonable analysis of what is appropriate now. And not trying to turn the dial of, we don't turn the revolution dial up to 100 if it's preliminary findings, right? Let's think about some action questions. What is the justification for why this knowledge can or should prompt action now? And it's not that you have a slide in your presentation that says justification for action now. It's that you're clear on that. It's that you're clear. There's an obvious through line between what we have learned and what needs to happen. What makes the action relevant? What might be objectively and manifestly different in the world because of this action? I find this to be an extremely helpful question. Because yes, we're thinking about an action, but we're thinking about an action through the lens of end state. So before we talk about actions people can take, we turn that back to what is different in the world because those actions were taken. How can we describe how this knowledge should be put into action without inferring an information deficit on the part of the audience? This is a critical learning from the world of science communication, which highlights that if you get up in front of people and you start telling them things, and implicitly or explicitly, the way you say what you say or what you say makes people feel like they're previously deficient in their knowledge, they will tune you out right away. A massive recent example of this is how messaging around vaccinations and COVID-19 rolled out. And a lot of people retrospectively looking at how governments communicated and responded to critiques around vaccines in a way that very often implied knowledge deficits on the people who they were very much trying to engage with. So you can, experiential learning. Flash poll, by a show of hands, who likes to be told what to do and think? Like, we don't. You're immediately kind of defensive to just someone else telling you what to do and think. And in the research world, we like to lean on the status and hierarchy and prestige of academia and say, well, we're here to tell you what you should think now because we've done the peer review research and now we have the answer. And I don't care how peer reviewed your research is or how true your answer is, if that is how you communicate it, you are setting yourself back and like science. So don't do that. How do we show, not tell? Which is, the classic mantra of writers. A fiction writer will tell you, like, if you just go on about telling, you're going to lose people. But if you show people what characters are thinking, if you show people what's different in the world, people will come with you. How will the experiences of people who act upon this knowledge inform future research? How will research be mutually beneficial? I realize this question, and probably a few of them, might feel a little out of scope for thinking about, I'm going to present my research at a conference. But it's a great time to ask questions about the program of research you're engaged with itself. How do the experiences of people who act upon this knowledge inform future research? So you are ostensibly going into this environment to share your research so that people will act, and as a result of acting, something in the world is going to be different. That is a research question. And we want that to be a complete loop, right? And not just the academics pouring, data out of a jar into the pool and seeing what happens. How will we evaluate the impact, consequences, or implications of the actions based on this knowledge? An evaluation question. So you're asking people to act. How is it that you might track the results of those actions over time? Okay, some questions about the audience, and I hope we're getting into some helpful perspectives for you to think through. How does this audience articulate their greatest needs? Well, I hope we're clear on what your needs are, what you see as the main objective, but how do they articulate their greatest needs? What are their perceived gaps between their actual and ideal? Like, what is the discrepancy between how whoever it is you're speaking to engages with the world right now and how they would ideally engage with the world? What are the real reasons? What real reasons do they have for investing in change? Some of these audience questions I think are so critical because they seem heady at one level, but then when you look at them and you think to yourself, if I'm intentionally trying to communicate with someone or someones, and I haven't thought about, well, what are their needs? Like, what are their gaps? I'm missing not just a critical opportunity to understand them, but also to communicate my message in that context. What incentivizes or disincentivizes the priorities and behaviors of people who can take this action? So I have this great action in mind. Hey, we're going to change this. We're going to write this policy. You're going to sign it for whatever the thing is. Like, if I'm flying like straight at a disincentive they have, then, well, that was a grand waste of everybody's time, right? What are their incentives? What makes sense for them? Where does this action or change in behavior, and assuming because there's an action, there's some kind of change in behavior that wouldn't exist otherwise, how does this action or change in behavior, where does it fall in their action priority matrix? And that is, just a 4x4, which you can stack activities, or as a grid, define activities that are high impact and low effort, which is a quick win, which is like something you can do that was really simple but had a great impact. I love quick wins. Does anybody else like quick wins? They're great. Then you have major projects, so things that are high in impact and also really high in effort. So they're bloody hard, but they have great results. Like it's like what happens as a result of them is really meaningful. Then you have fill-ins, like low impact things that you do that don't take a lot of effort. Thankless tasks, low impact, high effort. That's my taxes. It's a lot of work, and what does it change? It keeps me out of jail. But the point of all this is, if you are asking somebody to do something, or implicitly inviting somebody to do something, where does the thing that you're asking them or inviting them to do, where does it fall in a grid like this? It really dramatically changes the way you articulate the result. Because if you are if you are especially in the high effort quadrants, as a very, very, very different kind of message, you need a very, very different kind of buy-in than a low effort. How does this audience define the nature of truth? I think in the big grid, this might be like right near the center. Because we've learned that if you skip this question, you are kind of like shooting shotguns in the air at nothing. In the context of an academic conference, you are probably able to conceptualize this much easier than maybe in a open community event or a stakeholder event from different sectors, say, where you might have at the core people coming with fundamentally different approaches to what they need to back up the statement that such and such a thing is true. At an academic conference, people are going to be pretty on board with agreeing around a p-value, right? But it's still worth thinking about. Because even if we're on board with statistical methodology as a way to articulate and quantify how we've observed some phenomenon in the world, it's only one dimension of how any of us think about what is true. What people or institutions do they most trust? How do they conceive of us and we? Who is their them? Who is their we? When they see we, when they say we, who are they talking about? How do they measure social status? Now remember, we began this journey thinking about ourselves as social animals. If you have an idea for how someone in the world could change something based upon knowledge that you've gained, and that thing that someone else would be doing has consequences for how they perceive their social status, for the better or for the worse, that needs to be on your radar. How will we invite the audience to become our collaborators? How do we move beyond the point where it's a presentation, data, delivered, extracted, to something is happening together in the world, but it's together? What internal processes or structures impede their integration and involvement in research? How will we know our strategies to engage and collaborate with this audience are effective, equitable, and do not cause harm or sow seeds of distrust? Reciprocity. What are the potential ways that the information we are putting out into the world might produce or generate new knowledge, questions, or perspectives? What system feedback responses, reinforcing or self-correcting, do we anticipate in response to these actions? How do these assumptions inform our communication? What I mean by system feedback is that we can think about the relationships between foxes and rabbits, because foxes, tragically, eat the rabbits. And so when the foxes eat rabbits, what do you have fewer of? Rabbits. And if you have fewer rabbits, there is less food for the, not a trick question, foxes. If there's less food for the foxes, you have more. Thank you. We're tracking. Good. Okay. That is a self-correcting feedback loop. It's self-correcting system. People call it a negative feedback loop, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's self-correcting. It's actually good. And so, when there's change in the world, there's often some kind of feedback loop. And foxes and rabbits are like a fine little micro example of that. But like what we know from like ecosystem studies is that like none of those things are ever happening in a vacuum of just two variables. So when things change in the world, it not only changes one thing, it invariably changes something else, because life is this beautiful, complex, non-linear system. And so a system perspective asks, or assumes, I guess I should say, if something changes in the world, there are consequences that you actually can't anticipate. You can't predict. It's not linear. Doing A so that B happens does not, you can't predict. You have a very hard time predicting what C, D, E, F, and G are going to be. By the time you get to G, like who knows? Like who knows what the implications of that are going to be? So if we want to do not just good presentation, but good science, we are asking, if there's change in the world, what is going to be the result of that in ways that we can't anticipate or can't manage? Who is excluded in our conception of this ecosystem of individuals and groups? And so because we just said, hey, the world is this complex, non-linear, dynamic system of things and people and institutions and motivations and all this kind of stuff, it's worth thinking about, well, who is not coming to mind when you think about people who might use your research? When you think about people who might take actions based upon it differently? When you think about who might be impacted by the actions that someone else taking as a result of your research? And you start thinking about those second, third, fourth order ramifications, our little brains explode at that point. But it's worth mind mapping that, right? It's worth kind of scribbling some ideas on a piece of paper about, well, who are we just not assuming is a part of our mental model here? How can we segment and pluralize our conception of the audience? We keep talking about the audience. So by segment, I mean you can take any audience that you can imagine and start coming up with categorical definitions that will make it narrower and narrower and narrower until you get to like one individual, right? So anytime you say this is an audience, you're drawing arbitrary lines around some subset of people based on some subset of shared characteristic, and you're saying this is the audience. And I mean, nothing egregiously wrong with that, but that is just what we're doing. So an exercise here is to say, well, okay, what if I move the boundaries in a few steps? Like how much narrower does my understanding of the audience become if I move the boundaries closer together? And how do I think about the audience differently if I expand the boundaries, if I pluralize my idea of who the audience might be? The mean of that group changes every time I do this. And it's worth remembering that you making that definition is you making an arbitrary definition. So you want to experiment with bringing it outwards and inwards. What does authentic involvement mean for our collaborators and users? So we might have a great idea about what authentic involvement means, but that is pointless, what we have to feel about that. I mean, your feelings are important, and I don't want to delegitimize them, but it's the feelings of others that are far more important here. What are their nascent fears or hesitations to invest in future research? How would we know? How would we know? And we could say, oh, we could ask, but I mean, if someone has nascent fears and misgivings and apprehensions about something, asking is a way to invite information. We can see that there's all kinds of problems with that based upon the priors. How will we know that our strategy to share this research has achieved its objectives? What outcomes does this audience define as successes or failures? Again, not thinking about how we define success and failure. Important to think about that, yes. But if your definition of success and failure hasn't accounted for what other people, the people you're seeking to communicate, define as success or failure, it's obviously very limited. A couple of quick evaluation questions, which I think some of these probably are more attuned to thinking through these questions in the scope of like a research project or a research program, but it's worth thinking through as well in how we might evaluate what we've just done in sharing our research. How will we systematically seek to identify blind spots in our current knowledge? The unknown unknowns. One of the best assumptions that we can ever make is that our assumption set is missing data, that we're blind to some things. How can behavior change? Actions taken and system feedback, like we were talking about before. Can that be measured? Do we want to measure it? Would we want to think about that quantitatively or qualitatively? What evaluation questions or data points are most important and valuable for our collaborators and users? How will we take what we learn to plan future research projects differently moving forward? What is our continuous improvement model? I think going to a conference to present your research is a great place. It's a great playground for this question. The goal not just being to, hey, look what we did and look what we learned, but how would we think about this differently? What are different perspectives we might take? And finally, the counterfactual or the pre-mortem exercise, which is to imagine. You go to this conference to present this research, and let's just say the whole thing fails miserably. Something goes wrong. Not just like the PowerPoint doesn't work or something like that, but you've got a great talk and you deliver the thing and you're confronted by a room full of blank stares when the thing is over and that's it. Let's just imagine, for the sake of example, that happens. It's worth thinking about, okay, well, why did that happen? What would be possible reasons why that might happen? So there they are. Those are the people. What is it that they're going to do? And how does what they're going to do change in the world? And how do we think about how that change in the world feeds back into how we think about communicating that research? Your listeners have no more clarity on your call to action than you do. So we want to make the DNA of your presentation the pathway for your listeners to respond. Information needs action to become knowledge. You can do the information part by talking, by making nice slides, but we don't get to knowledge until we get to action. So the DNA of the presentation is a pathway. It's an invitation for people to do something.